preferring to call him the Grunt. Young George had one eye higher than the other, his nose was totally flat, and a cleft palate had viciously twisted his mouth, causing him to talk in a low grunt. Henderson consulted physicians. None had the expertise to do anything for the youngster. And as the boy entered his teens, his problems increased. It seemed the taller he grew, the more stooped he became. On his 16th birthday, the terrifying truth emerged. During a vicious argument, Sophie told Henderson that George was not his son. She'd been carrying such a great burden, and it all spilled out like a leak in the Atlantic. First, Henderson learned that Sophie's mother was also her sister, who had been the victim of incest since she was 12 years old. And once Sophie had reached that age, their father turned his attentions upon her. And even after her marriage, he'd been visiting her and having sex as he had done throughout her childhood. Sophie'd been too frightened and ashamed to tell her husband. The child was deformed because of inbreeding. It was as if someone had wrenched out his heart. Henderson grabbed his silver-topped cane and went straight to the slums that existed on what is now roughly Gateshead's bus station. He entered the home of the tinker and beat him to death. He then set fire to the hovel and left. The authorities interviewed Henderson, who admitted to beating the old man, but claimed to have left before the fire started. And such was his influence at the time, charges were never brought against him. And from that day, young George was never allowed out of the old mansion on Windmill Hills. He remained confined to his 12-foot room, and he died of influenza at the age of only 39 in 1795, having been hidden away for almost 24 years. People said he had never ever been out in the sun. Henderson never slept with Sophie again, and she ran off 3 months after her son died. It was believed that she set up home with a butcher in Salt Meadows Road. Henderson's financial empire crashed around his ears. He had no appetite for it anymore. He allowed various parts to be taken from him by his own employees, who struck out on their own. In 1789, there was a mysterious fire that burned down the businessman's mansion, and despite a thorough raking through the ashes, no one ever found the body of Charles Henderson, and some say that his spirit will not rest until it is found. 2 ghosts walk Windmill Hills. One, the grief-stricken old man with a silver-topped cane who can be heard weeping or seen holding his head in his hands in doorways. The other desperate ghost is said to be that of George Henderson, who hammers on doors begging to be released, clawing with bloody fingernails at heavy doors. Now, one of the buildings built on the site of the Henderson home later became an unemployment benefit office, and an ex-employee, Tom, said, "I worked there for a good few years and often heard late in the afternoon doors slamming and a hammering coming from upstairs as if someone were trapped. And if you followed the sound, it came from one of the rooms on the very top floor. Despite our radiators being on full blast, it was always bitterly cold. And occasionally people would claim to have seen glimpses of a man with a hunched back hobbling around. One of my colleagues, a woman in her 50s, actually fainted while sitting in the ladies' loo because she heard a man grunting behind her in a sexual manner. We had to burst the lock on that door to get in, dress her. We then took her to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital outpatients. She had such a shock, she was off work for almost a month. She came back for a fortnight and then found a job with a local electricity board. And whilst walking her dogs past Windmill Hills one cold Sunday morning in 1982, Mrs. Kathleen O'Connor experienced something very strange. She claims that she heard a woman screaming and flagged down a police car. She pointed police towards the old house, telling them she had heard shouts of, "Father, no, don't do this to me," followed by screams of agony and torment. The police checked the scene, yet no evidence of wrongdoing. Had that been the The horrified pleadings of young Sophie being raped yet again by her incestuous father. Now, before I share my final tale with you today, I just want to tell you about some lost treasure, because nobody else will tell you about this. Near Houstead's fort, there is said to be a box of treasure at the bottom of the lake at Broomley Lough. Everything about it is a mystery, and all I can merely recount to you are some of the variables, so you can make your own mind up as to whether you believe any of them. On researching this particular legend, I was told that the treasure was the Holy Grail deposited there by Sir Galahad for safekeeping when Arthur was close to death. I also heard it was King John's treasure that had been rescued from the Wash and carted north by border reivers. The collected treasure was from the man known as Robin Hood. He'd believed that his men were about to betray him, so he arranged for all of his most valuable gold and jewels to be placed on a boat and sunk in the middle of a lake far from where he did his thing. I also heard it was the Ark of the Covenant, secretly brought to Britain whilst the body of Christ was moved and buried beneath Rennes in France. Whichever path you chose to take, the treasure is certainly worth uncovering. On several occasions throughout history, they have tried to remove the treasure, and in the process, horses, donkeys, and dogs have been killed in efforts to drag the bottom of the lake. Mrs. Ivy Hall from Saltburn visited the lake and paddled at the water's edge on a hot, sunny day in 1953. She'd suffered from verrucas and ingrowing toenails, yet on removing her feet from the water, all affectation was gone. Locals say that there is a religious artifact blessed by God that lies in the lake, and those who believe in God, who bathe there, will be cured from whatever ails them. But just to complete our grisly tale, I've decided to take you to one of the greatest castles left standing anywhere in Great Britain, Bamborough. It was used as Macbeth's castle in Roman Polanski's film. It is the archetypal northern fortress. Earlier structures on this site were probably used by the Romans and Celts, who called it Dingwaroi. Yet only when the walls were changed from wood to stone did it become to be known as impregnable.